So good afternoon and good evening, everyone. Thank you for joining us for our July's Living with Liver Disease session. My name is Monica Chewy, and I'm the Director of Development and Community Engagement. I will be the moderator and host for this session. I would like to start by acknowledging that the Canadian Liver Foundation's national office in Markham, Ontario, is situated upon traditional territories of the Anishinaabe peoples and of the Haudenosaunee peoples, covered by the Upper Canada Treaties. The CLF's Living with Liver Disease program has been around for more than 25 years, and it continues to serve as an educational tool for both patients and caregivers, but also as a peer support tool. The program provides an opportunity to increase community-based learning about liver disease and the importance of liver health in hopes to reduce the incidence and impact of liver disease through prevention, early diagnosis, treatment, and care without geographical barriers. Speakers include healthcare providers, allied health professionals, subject matter experts, as well as patient advocates. Now, to get a better idea of who our audience members are today and where they are turning in from, we will open two short polls that will pop up on your screen. Today's session will address viral hepatitis. We are joined by our presenters, Dr. Eric Yoshida from the University of British Columbia, and patient advocates Colette and Wendy. We will have our three speakers complete their talks prior to moving to a Q&A portion. Please feel free to use the chat feature at the bottom of the Zoom screen to ask your questions during the presentation, and note that questions will be answered following the speakers' presentations. Following the Q&A, we will be hosting breakout room sessions. This will provide an opportunity for our community members across the country to talk about their journeys openly and safely, share insights, stories, tips, and suggestions with others who may be going through the same thing in their respective local, regional, provincial area. For those who are not familiar with breakout rooms, it is a feature within the Zoom platform that allows people to be split into smaller groups within the meeting. The groups are split into regions or provinces. We suggest joining the group that best fits your geographical location. If you find yourself not sure which group to join, one of our moderators and staff members will assign you to a group. The breakout rooms will be running for 20 minutes. Today's session will be recorded and available on the Canadian Liver Foundation's Living with Liver Disease webpage, as well as our YouTube page in the coming days. In respecting your members' privacy, the breakout room sessions will not be recorded. For those of you who are new to this program and may not be familiar with the CLF, we were established in 1969 and was the first organization in the world created to help people with liver disease. We are committed to promoting liver health and improving the prevention, diagnosis, and treatment of liver disease through our four core pillars: research, education, patient support, and advocacy. Now, at this time, I would like to welcome our first speaker, Dr. Eric Yoshida. Dr. Yoshida is a liver specialist and professor of medicine at the University of British Columbia. He is recognized throughout Canada and around the world for his clinical care and research excellence in liver disease. Formerly medical director of the BC Liver Transplant Program, he found a way for patients with hepatitis B to have successful liver transplants and established the first program in Canada to provide HIV patients with the right to be allowed liver transplantation. He also discovered that BC's First Nations communities suffered disproportionately from primary biliary cirrhosis and autoimmune liver disease, destroying the stereotype that alcoholic liver disease was the problem, and clearly clearing the way for First Nations patients to undergo liver transplantation. So without further ado, please join me in welcoming Dr. Eric Yoshida.
Great, thank you. Thank you, Monica. I hope everybody can hear me. This running water sound from my office just started a few minutes ago. It's coming from one of the upper floors. And thank you for this picture from like 20 years ago. Next slide. Next slide. We're talking about viral hepatitis today. And I like to just say that as a land acknowledgement that we recognize that the sites occupied by the Vancouver General Hospital and the campus of the University of British Columbia lie on the traditional, ancestral, and unceded territory of the Coast Salish peoples that includes the territories of the Squamish, Tsleil-Waututh, and Musqueam nations. It's important to realize that in British Columbia, unlike the other provinces, before Confederation in 1867, the British government never negotiated any treaties with any of the Indigenous nations, and the government of Canada never did either. So essentially, we may very well be squatters on Indigenous land here in British Columbia. Next slide, please. This isn't really a thanks to, it's more an acknowledgement that I've actually worked on with a lot of drug companies on clinical trials. They've been the sponsors of clinical trials, which I've been an investigator. I've received an unrestricted research grant from some companies, and I've given some lectures and was paid an honorarium by those companies. If this somehow affects this lecture, I'll let you be the judge. Next slide. Now, first, a big shout out to Monica for inviting me and for putting on this presentation. Karen Tito from the Canadian Liver Foundation, who works with me in my role as the MAC chair of the Medical Advisory Committee. Nem for actually fixing all the slides and actually formatting them and doing all the work. And a special thanks to the VGH Liver team. We have huge numbers, but we are the liver hospital of BC, at least in my opinion. Next slide. So let's talk about where the liver is. A lot of people talk about viral hepatitis, but don't really know where the liver is. Well, if you watch a football game, preferably a Canadian football game over an NFL game, where the running back tucks the ball in under his right rib cage, that's where your liver is. And it's about the size of a football as well. So your liver is one of the most important organs of your body. Next slide. So your everything that you eat goes into your stomach, into your small bowel, is absorbed into your bloodstream, and the first organ it hits is actually the liver. So the liver basically acts as a filter. If you have medications, chemicals in the environment, alcohol, guess what? That's going to hit your liver before it hits the rest of your body. A lot of sugar called glucose is converted to starch and is stored in the liver. The liver also makes a lot of proteins that you need to live. Every single one of your blood clotting factors, except number 8, is made in your liver. So basically, if your liver isn't working, your blood isn't going to clot. The liver makes a lot of other proteins like albumin. It also regulates and stores cholesterol. All the toxic substances that your kidney does not get rid of, your liver gets rid of because it gets excreted into the bile and dumped into your small bowel. And that's how, and then you poo it out. The liver also has a lot of white blood cells, which act as immunity, because everything, don't forget, some bugs, bacteria tend to periodically get into the liver, and the liver immune system just gets rid of them. So your liver is one of the most important liver organs of your body. Next slide. So the question is, what causes liver disease? Well, the truth is that there's like Am I still muted?
No, you're good now.
Okay, so there's there's a ton of liver diseases, and some are rare and some are very common. So the very common fatty liver disease, not related to alcohol, affecting about 20 to 30% of the population. Next common, hepatitis, viral hepatitis like A, B, C, and more. Alcohol is probably higher than alcohol is actually higher than viral hepatitis, but we just put viral hepatitis second because that's the topic of this lecture. Rare genetic liver diseases like iron overload called hemochromatosis affects about 1 in 200 people from a Northern European background. Wilson's disease, which is the copper overload, copper storage disease, affects about 1 in 30,000 and is distributed throughout the world. Alpha-1 antitrypsin, which is also a liver storage disease and also causes early emphysema like COPD. That is also a cause for cirrhosis. And then there's the immunologic diseases, autoimmune hepatitis, primary biliary cholangitis, and primary sclerosing cholangitis, where their immune system, for whatever reason, we don't really know why, starts seeing your liver as being foreign, and it attacks either the liver or the bile duct. Just like rheumatoid arthritis affects the joints, multiple sclerosis, your immune system attacks part of your brain, that kind of thing. Next slide. So what about the symptoms of liver disease? Well, the truth is, most people don't have any symptoms at all. And the reason is that your liver is a very big organ and has a tremendous amount of reserve. So by the time your liver causes you to have symptoms, you're functioning on about less than 10% of the reserve. So the exceptions being acute liver disease, where something happens acutely and you will recover, because if you don't recover, you will die. So like an acute hepatitis, you can feel fatigue, have a lot of nausea, vomiting, your urine turns dark and you turn yellow. And that's because your liver has been totally affected by this acute process, and hopefully it'll recover. Now, in a lot of diseases, people don't really notice that they have acute disease until they have cirrhosis, and it's kind of, by the time you have symptoms, you have no reserve and you kind of need a liver transplant or you're going to die early, or have premature mortality. That's perhaps the more diplomatic way of saying things. But if you start retaining bile products in your skin, you're going to be really scratching. You're going to be itchy. A lot of patients that we see for liver transplant assessment, they look like they're pregnant with triplets, because they have about 10 liters of fluid building up in their abdomen and periodically has to be drained. And they get swelling of their legs because they don't have any albumin to suck the water back into the veins. All that ammonia and other nitrogenous waste that the liver clears, a failing liver isn't clearing that, and it's going right into your circulation and goes right to your brain, and people think you're either drunk or you have Alzheimer's disease. You can't drive if you have confusion from liver disease that we call hepatic encephalopathy. You get these varicose veins of your esophagus that we call esophageal varices, just from the back pressure. And when they get big enough, they burst, in which case it's almost like you've been shot. Your blood pressure crashes, you're throwing up blood. It's one of the most dramatic things in gastroenterology. And the risk of death from a first bleed is about 20%. So it's very dramatic. I know at least one endoscopy nurse who had post-traumatic stress disorder after scoping an emergency bleed with me. Next slide. And so if anybody likes to see what the organs actually look like, the one that says healthy liver is what your liver looks like. That nice organ, and then there's progressive scarring, and progressive scarring over years, decades, ends up as a very nodular, really scarred up liver that becomes shrunken, and about 5% per year, somebody with cirrhosis will get liver cancer. And this cancer that is on the slide is one that is multicentric, which means it's everywhere. And this one is studying the liver, and this is obviously a pathology specimen, a post-mortem, autopsy specimen. But it's important to realize that when you have cirrhosis, your entire liver is a breeding ground. So yeah, we can treat one liver cancer. We can ablate it with radiofrequency ablation. I should say the radiologists do it, not me. But then later, another cancer in another part of the liver appears, and it's not like there's been a recurrence. It's like that's a new cancer that just developed, and that's what kind of happens with liver disease. All the cancer genes called oncogenes somehow just start turning on all at once, and that's what happens. Next slide. And so let's talk about the main event, which is like viral hepatitis. Now, the word hepatitis just simply means that your liver is kind of inflamed and swollen. And you can have viral hepatitis, which means a viral particle has caused this. Alcohol can sometimes cause an acute alcoholic hepatitis. We call inflammation from fat, when it's non-alcoholic, we call it non-alcoholic cell hepatitis, or NASH. When the immune system attacks your liver, the liver cells, it's called autoimmune hepatitis. And some people refer to drug injuries. We call it drug hepatotoxicity, drug-induced liver disease. There's a drug-induced liver injury called DILI, but some of the old school people still call it drug-induced hepatitis. So the word hepatitis itself just means an inflamed liver. Next slide. So it's important to realize that there's acute and chronic hepatitis. Talking about the viral side. So acute hepatitis means a new infection. You haven't had this infection before. It's brand new. You're newly infected, and you're usually symptomatic, but some people, sometimes you're not, and it depends. We'll talk about it in a second. It depends on what kind of hepatitis and how old you are. It may or may not become chronic. Now, chronic hepatitis, by definition, means the infection's been there for longer than 6 months. Usually, if it's longer than 6 months, it's there forever until it's treated. Variable severity, it can lead to scarring, which we call fibrosis, which over years, decades, can, as I mentioned before, develop into cirrhosis. Now, it's also important to realize that you can have like a chronic hepatitis, like a hepatitis B or C, and then you can suddenly get a new hepatitis superimposed. Like you went on vacation to somewhere in the developing world, and got acute hepatitis A, and then you have acute hepatitis superimposed on a chronic hepatitis, and the outcome is usually worse. And so that's why everybody with a chronic liver disease should probably get vaccinated against hepatitis A. Next slide. So in terms of how common the three main ones, A, B, and C are, well, hepatitis A is, well, in Canada, it usually happens to people who went to a country where there's a lot of it, what we call it's endemic. And then they came back to Canada and had acute hepatitis A. So they went to Asia, some parts of Asia, not Japan, but they went to some parts of Asia, Africa, Central America, South America, Mexico, ate something that was contaminated and got acute hepatitis A. But it's also important to realize that acute hepatitis A can also be a sexually transmitted infection, and there are point source outbreaks related to STIs. Also, food can sometimes be a point source outbreak. Every so often, there's a case of hepatitis A that arose out of some frozen food that was packaged somewhere outside of Canada, the United States. I think the last one, actually, well, I think it was this year, wasn't it strawberries from Mexico that caused a point source outbreak of acute hepatitis A somewhere in Canada and parts of the United States? That kind of thing. That happens periodically. Hepatitis B, well, hepatitis B, a worldwide problem. 88% of the world's population lives in an area where hepatitis B, there's a lot of it. It's like China, Africa, Southeast Asia, for some reason, Russia tends to have some. There's a lot of hepatitis B in Asia and Africa. It's 100 times more infectious than HIV. And in Canada, okay, I've seen some government statistics saying there's only 3,180 hepatitis B carriers in Canada. Well, that's crazy because Dr. Peter Kwan, who also works for the does volunteer stuff with Monica and the Canadian Liver Foundation, he and I alone have more than 3,000 chronic hepatitis B patients. So that's absolutely crazy. It's more like 300,000, and that's an estimate. Now, hepatitis C also a worldwide problem. Some countries have more than others, but in Canada, it's estimated that about 300,000 Canadians have been exposed to hepatitis C. Now, we have miracle drugs, which we'll talk about. So how many are active carriers? Now, hopefully that number is dwindling. It's usually, most people don't know they have hepatitis C, and it's estimated that about a third don't even know they have hepatitis C until they get tested. And so the Canadian Liver Foundation has advocated that all of the baby boomer generation and some of the post-boomers get screened if you were born between 1945 and 1975. Now, in the United States, the American Center for Disease Control, which is a major federal agency, part of the National Institute of Health, big on the COVID. Their head was on TV all the time with President Bush. I mean, not President Bush, President Trump, and now with President Biden. But they have the same recommendations as the Canadian Liver Foundation. It's interesting that the Canadian Public Task Force in Ottawa decided they weren't going to make that recommendation. So I don't know what to say. Unlike hepatitis B and hepatitis A, there is no vaccine for hepatitis C. That's probably because just like, actually even worse than COVID, but more like HIV, the virus just mutates so much that it's like you can't really make a vaccine, because if you vaccinate somebody within probably days to weeks, the virus is already mutated. So the vaccine is inefficient and unsuccessful. But I don't know if they're still working on it. They're still working on the HIV vaccine, but they may have given up on the hepatitis C vaccine. Next slide. So let's talk about specific hepatitis. So hepatitis A. So the mode of transmission is basically this grosses out high school students, but it's fecal-oral. It's contamination of food from basically contaminated species. And that's how it's spread, and it's also in the water. During outbreaks, and there was an outbreak in China in the 1990s where shellfish was contaminated because there was contaminated water from sewers that contaminated the shellfish, but people then ate, and then they got hepatitis A. So that's how that happened. Obviously, sexual contact, some sexual practices can cause transmission of hepatitis A. If you have hepatitis A and you're like a small child, you may feel nothing, or the parents may think you only have a cold. But when you're an adult, boy, you are really sick. You're yellow, you're throwing up, you may have diarrhea, you're fatigued, you have a lot of chills, your liver might hurt, and then your stool might turn light colored and your urine turns dark. Hepatitis A, there's no specific treatment for it. You just have to survive. And I will say that about 1 in 1,000 adults who get hepatitis A is at risk for dying or needing a liver transplant. But there is no antiviral agent for hepatitis A. And the best defense is the best offense, right? And so just vaccinate yourself against hepatitis A. Just like get a simple injection. Your pharmacist can do that for you. And hepatitis A does not become chronic. So once you get it and you survive, you have lifelong immunity, unlike COVID-19. Because people can get COVID-19 2, 3, and even 4 times. But anyway, next slide. So hepatitis A, hepatitis B. Well, there's really two populations of hepatitis B. There's the vertical transmission from mother to child. That's the most common means in the world, and that's the way most Canadians have gotten it. And then there's horizontal transmission, where it's basically an STI, sexually transmitted infection, and that's where they can get it acutely. And let me tell you, about 20 years ago, there was an outbreak of young and middle-aged men getting hepatitis B from body rub parlors in Vancouver, and we wrote a paper on that. It got published. Injection street drugs, you can get a lot of viral infections, including hepatitis B and hepatitis C. Contact sports is one where it's possible to get viral hepatitis. Actually, I think it happens more often than we appreciate, and that's why in professional sports, whether it's boxing or whether it's football or hockey or soccer, they usually insist that patients who are active carriers or players who are active carriers must be treated with antivirals, and they recommend that everybody get vaccinated. The symptoms of acute hepatitis are exactly like hepatitis B, are exactly like acute hepatitis A, but a lot of patients who get it from their mothers, they actually have no symptoms. And that's like chronic hepatitis B. And so they don't get symptoms until they get cirrhosis or liver cancer, when it's almost too late. Now, treatment, there is very good treatment for hepatitis B. There is no treatment that you can actually clear the virus permanently. The pharmaceutical research and development companies are still trying to find an answer, but we have the next best thing. We can suppress the virus like HIV, and you can live forever with adequate viral suppression. So we have great drugs, tenofovir and entecavir for high viral loads, and for low viral loads, I still like lamivudine. Interferon, well, we don't really use interferon because, one, it had bad side effects, and patients almost rarely cleared the virus. It was something that simply nobody liked, including the patients. I don't even think they make interferon anymore. And again, we have a vaccine that in the British Columbia, the province of British Columbia, every child at birth gets vaccinated. I'm not sure what the policies are in other provinces. I know Ontario, it was like you have to be school-aged to get it, but we as the Canadian Liver Foundation, we believe that every baby should be vaccinated. Next slide. Hepatitis C, well, it used to be that it was spread from two sources. One was the tainted blood. If the audience is old enough to remember the tainted blood scandal that caused the downfall of the Red Cross and resulted in the creation of Canadian Blood Services, that was the tainted blood scandal, and that was a good way of getting hepatitis C. But most is can be injection street drug use. Sexual contact, unlike hepatitis B, is very difficult to do. It does happen, but it's actually difficult. And there have been some kind of unusual studies published in the United States where they would take a couple. There's a discordant pair. One of the partners has hepatitis C, the other doesn't, and they had to document every single time they had intercourse, and then after many years they compiled the number of sexual acts and the transmission, and they would document 60 to 100,000 acts of sex with not a single transmission of hepatitis C. So it's actually difficult to get hepatitis C, but still it does happen. obviously tattoos. Yeah, I think I misspelled tattoo because it has two T's. It has three T's. Body piercings. Mother to child. It can happen. It depends on the viral load of the mother. But we used to say it never happened, but it actually does. Um, Symptoms again. When you have advanced disease, that's when you have the symptoms. But a lot of patients have non-specific symptoms, and also there's a rare patient for whom the antibody binding to the virus plugs up your blood vessels and causes an inflammation called a vasculitis. And then you can be in real trouble. It can affect a lot of organs, and it can also produce painful skin rash. Hepatitis C is the success of the 21st century. We have miracle drugs for which I think the cure rate is actually well over 95%. Most of the time it's 98%. And they have almost no side effects. They're extremely well tolerated. The ones that are prescribed these days tend to be Epclusa, which is marketed by Gilead, manufactured by Gilead, Navarette, which is manufactured by AbbVie, and Vosevi, which is manufactured by Gilead. Vosevi is in BC. You can only get Vosevi if you failed Epclusa or Navarette. And as mentioned before, there's no vaccine for hepatitis C. So next slide. So who's at risk for hepatitis A? Well, if you like world travel, you're at risk. If somebody in your family just happens to have hepatitis A, yeah, you might be at risk until they get rid of it. If you use drugs or are involved in sexual activity that with somebody who has hepatitis A, yeah, you're at risk. But it's again, not all patients with hepatitis A have symptoms. We talked about a lot of the symptoms, but the older you are, the more likely you are to get bad symptoms that requires a liver transplant. And rarely hepatitis A can cause death or require a liver transplant, but it is rare. Hepatitis B, if you are not if your mother did not have hepatitis B, and then if you have unprotected sex with somebody who has a hepatitis B carrier, you're at risk. Then it would be an STI, what we call horizontal transmission. But as mentioned, most in Canada, they got it from their moms. Thanks, Mom. So they got it from their moms, and that's called vertical transmission. And there's prophylaxis. If the obstetrician knows that the mother has hepatitis B, they can give what's called post-exposure prophylaxis. They can give hepatitis B immune globulin and the first dose of vaccine as soon as the baby is born, like right away. And that is very effective. For health outcomes, if you're an adult, you have acute hepatitis A, well, you're gonna suffer, but you have a 95% chance of never becoming chronic. On the other hand, if you're a baby and you get hepatitis B, it's almost about 99% certain that you are probably going to have chronic hepatitis B. If you have active inflammation causing target organ damage, yeah, you're probably going to need antiviral agents. And yes, if you have cirrhosis and your liver is failing, a liver transplant can rescue you. Hepatitis C, who's at risk? Again, it's people who use drugs, street drugs, or engage in body piercing and tattoos, and either homemade or with fly-by-night places that don't use sterile equipment. Back in the 70s, I think dentists and doctors infected a lot of people because there's like all these baby boomers who never used drugs at all and had no risk factors, and they got hepatitis C. They probably got it through the medical healthcare system. And hepatitis C is very common in a lot of countries outside of Canada. So immigration to Canada produce Canadians with hepatitis C, and of course, blood transfusions before 1992. Hepatitis C health outcomes. Well, hopefully hepatitis C will be eradicated by 2030 as the World Health Organization wants, but it used to be one of the leading causes of liver transplant, and it used to result in death and cirrhosis, but we're seeing less and less of that because more and more people are getting treated. Next slide. And let's talk about less common hepatitis. Hepatitis E, people go, there's a hepatitis E? Well, yeah, there is. We used to think that it was one of those exotic ones that only happened in the subcontinent of India, but now we know that it's actually, there's actual cases around the world, and there's becoming more. But there is more hepatitis E in Asia, especially Central Asia, South Asia, and in Africa. But keep in mind, it's still worldwide. Now, the other thing is that swine can get it, like pigs. Pigs can get it. And in fact, in some countries, they found that a lot of swine herds that end up as bacon and ham actually have hepatitis E antibodies. And it's in China, there's a lot of people who get hepatitis E by eating undercooked pork. I've even seen cases of hepatitis E from eating undercooked pork. I've seen it happen in people who went to Italy and in people came from China. So hepatitis E happens. Just keep in mind, don't eat undercooked pork. Just cook your pork until it's well done. That's my advice. Hepatitis E is acute like hepatitis A, and you're supposed to have lifelong immunity. But in the immunocompromised patients, and usually it's reported in kidney transplant recipients, hepatitis E can be chronic, and there's no treatment for hepatitis E. So yeah, if you're a kidney transplant recipient and you have hepatitis E, that's kind of a problem. Ribavirin can be used, but it doesn't work very well. And for acute hepatitis E, we've actually transplanted people with acute hepatitis C. So just keep that in mind. Next slide. So really weird and interesting viral hepatitis is hepatitis delta or hepatitis D. This is a true Star Trek kind of virus. This is a virus that uses another virus as a parasite, as crazy as that may sound. So the hepatitis D itself is ineffective. It can't infect you because it can't replicate on its own. But what it does is somebody who's a hepatitis D carrier, it piggybacks onto the hepatitis B and then starts using the hepatitis B replicative machinery to reproduce its own viral protein. And so it's a true parasitic virus. And hepatitis B, hepatitis D co-infection is common in parts of the world like Eastern Europe, Africa, some parts of Asia. It's less common in Canada. Hepatitis D, I wrote hepatitis E there, but hepatitis D can actually be worse than hepatitis B alone. If some patients with known hepatitis D suddenly get worse, like they deteriorate and you don't know why, always think about, as I tell the medical students, I always think about checking for hepatitis C. And the course of chronic hepatitis B and hepatitis C is more aggressive. And unfortunately, there really isn't very good antiviral therapy for hepatitis C. Interferon sucks for hepatitis C, and it sucks for hepatitis C. And guess what? It's sucking for hepatitis D. It's not very effective. There is a potentially good antiviral agent called bulevirtide. It's not licensed in North America, so you can't really get it at all right now. But the company is thinking of having a phase 3 trial as part of the licensing process. So hopefully that gets off the ground relatively soon. And I've forgotten what drug company is looking at. Next slide. So to summarize, this is kind of just a summary slide. So hepatitis A can't be chronic, can't cause cirrhosis, can't cause cancer, not no specific treatment, but it's your body can get rid of it for you, and there's a vaccine. Hepatitis B, yes, it can be chronic. Yes, it can produce cirrhosis. Yes, it can cause cancer. Yes, it's very treatable. No, you can't kind of get rid of it. No drug will get rid of it. Some people spontaneously get rid of it, but generally no drug can actually do that for you. And yes, there's a vaccine. Hepatitis C, usually transmission of blood products. Yes, chronic. Yes, cirrhosis. Yes, cancer, definitely. Definitely treatable, definitely curable, and no vaccine. Next slide. So this is my last slide. I never really thought that here we are 4th month into this terrible war, but I think all of us at the Canadian Liver Foundation support the Ukraine. And thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Yoshida, for that great talk. I would now like to welcome our second presenter, Colette. Colette is from Northern BC and currently resides in Vancouver. Her favorite activities include exercising outdoors, power walking, biking, hiking, weight training. Colette has a background in visual arts and enjoys doing anything creative. She is with us today and will be sharing her experience living with hepatitis C. So welcome, Colette. You mute yourself. Unmute yourself, please.
Can you hear me okay? Yes? Okay. All right, I have had the occasion to tell my story very little, so please bear with me. There's some, a few crevices along here. In 1991, I was in an emergency surgery situation and I had to have a blood transfusion. And having the blood transfusion, it saved my life, but I went into a coma for about 5 days. When I came out of the coma, my bilirubin and AST was super high. My enzymes were in the hundreds, high hundreds, and they didn't really know what was going on, what was wrong with me. So a specialist from the Red Cross came in to talk to me and said that they thought I had mononucleosis. So I checked myself out of the hospital after 3 days. I was still very ill. And then I went to a liver specialist and he said, you're going to have to go on a list because your counts are just too high. The AST is just too much. So what happened next was I went in a few different doctors, but nobody kind of had an idea how to treat me. And then the Red Cross approached me and said that they found that I had hepatitis C. So confirming that, they said there was no treatment except for some kind of antiviral, one of the cancer treatments. They could try it, but there was an 8 to 10% chance that it would work. And I was quite ill at the time, and I didn't want to get more ill from medication. So I went on a bit of a sojourn into trying to treat my own liver problem because, like I say, there was nothing. There was, all you have to do is stay away from alcohol, drugs, which wasn't an issue for me because I wasn't a drinker to begin with. But so long story short, I researched into Chinese medicine and I found that there amazingly was some knowledge about the liver I came across. And I got some treatment. It was really outrageously sour, awful tasting. But what did happen was my liver count, I think you call it liver count, it started to go down. Now my AST stayed really high. So, but my liver count started going down. I started to feel less fatigued. I probably went through a period of feeling very fatigued for about 15 months. This was a challenging time because I had a bouncy 7-year-old son at the time to have to take care of, plus my business. So I was stressed, and maybe if I wasn't so stressed, it wouldn't have taken so long to feel like I was recovering. But I think it took me about 3 years to feel not so fatigued. Then what happened was, and I still didn't know exactly how I got it, except that before the surgery, 3 months before, I was in India. So the Red Cross said that's probably where I contracted it from. And my husband and I did not agree. We just, because we weren't in those kind of areas in India, we were in very protected areas. Anyway, I continued to explore alternatives, including kombucha, before anybody had ever heard of that. I was making my own. And if you know anything about kombucha, it is quite something. It is a drink that really helps your enzymes, but it also is something that kind of grows in a bottle and expands, and it's another thing to make altogether. It's very strange, but that was helping my enzymes too. About 7 years later, I was approached by the Red Cross. They said, I got a letter from the Red Cross. They said, definitely I had been given tainted blood for my transfusion. And, you know, this was confirming to me, but it wasn't helpful as far as how am I going to deal with this. I just want to say that when I woke up every morning that I woke up when I had this hepatitis, I felt that there was a little bit of a fever in my body. And so anyway, the Red Cross said, yes, this was the situation and this is what happened. And shortly after that, I was approached by a group to form a class action lawsuit with the Red Cross. And I had been hearing about different people that were dealing with their hepatitis C, but I think it was the loneliness that was really tough on it, because it wasn't something I could talk to just about to anybody. There's such a stigma attached to it too. Like I had abused my body. This was the reason why this was happening. So I did meet other people. I heard of other people, and sadly, some of them had passed away. So I decided that, you know, a group organized thing wasn't for me, but I did go with the group that was with the class action lawsuit, and I went through that. That was it was difficult to do, but I knew that was the next section. That was just the next part of my getting healthier journey. I continued to take lots of supplements and some of the Chinese herbs. And then during that time, I also had to have, I don't know if it was a result of hepatitis. I mean, it's really hard to say, but I had another major surgery that was, I had a cyst that formed on my ovary, and it turned out that it was kind of the size of a grapefruit. I had that removed, and then there was botched surgery after that, and I almost, I had a very close call with death from a nearly ruptured bowel situation, and I was in the hospital for quite a few weeks with feed tubing and everything, food tubing. And so I'm not sure if that was hepatitis, but my system was not strong. I couldn't seem to recover from things. I would get a cold, and I know we would be traveling, and by the time I would get to the place we were traveling to, I'd have full-blown pneumonia, little, situations like that. So then I was really fortunate that many years went by and I was trying to cope with this. And one day I met Monica through the Live Right events, and we got involved with contributing something to the event itself. And I met Monica, and it was such a great thing because she introduced me to Dr. Ho, and Dr. Ho was actually the first doctor I went to who could really appreciate what I had gone through and did not place the blame or the onuses on how I had taken care of my health. He's such a caring, wonderful doctor. And then he was so compassionate. To this day, I feel so much appreciation, and he gave me the confidence to continue on, and he introduced me to Dr. Yoshida, who I went to see. My husband and I went to see him, and again, so much care and compassion, and knew exactly what was going on, because previous to that, before about a year, I thought, because I'm getting into my elder years, I had better try as much as I can to get a handle on this hepatitis, to try to get some kind of treatment. And I had been reading different medical journals from the UK and different places in the world that there was a lot of studying going on. And so the timing worked ideally because Dr. Yoshida said that there was a trial treatment program about to start. And so fortunately, I was nominated to go on this trial. The treatment involved, I think it was 10 days, and it was, I think medication was, in the morning and the evening. The only side effect I can actually say what was happening was I slept really well. So that's a pretty good side effect. And after the 10 days, I had to go and have, blood work done. They wanted to have my blood work every week, which was no issue. I would go and do that. And then after the 10-day trial, I went and had a test, liver scan, and my liver looked very healthy. And I was told there's no more hepatitis, which is so fantastic and quite unbelievable after being through such a journey. And I felt very appreciative and relieved, and I have, to this day, I have had no side effects, and I'm just able to live normally and just get stronger and healthier. So I'm much healthier than I was 20 years ago. And yeah, I feel so much appreciation. So thank you, Dr. Yoshida and the team. And Monica for being so open to giving me the suggestion to go and see the doctors. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Colette, for sharing your Hep C journey. The Dr. Ho that Colette was talking about or referring to was our late beloved BC chapter board president, Dr. Francis Ho. So now I would like to welcome our final speaker, Wendy. Wendy was born and raised in Vancouver, BC. She enjoys outdoor activities around the city and exploring beautiful parts of the world with her husband. She also enjoys spending quality time with her family and keeping busy with her large garden. Wendy will be talking about her experience living with chronic hepatitis B. So, Ladies and gentlemen, Wendy.
Just get you to unmute there, Wendy, please.
Okay. There. Now I'm unmuted. Hello?
Yeah,
I believe I'm
hear you,
unmuted.
Wendy.
Okay,
Yes,
great.
you're good.
Great. So I found out I had chronic hepatitis B when I was in university in the 1980s. At the time, I knew very little about the disease. This was before the internet existed. I did know, though, that I had acquired it at birth from my mom, who had been born in China, and that was infectious. So I need to make sure that those close to me were protected. So after my fiance found out that he had the antibodies, I made no changes to my lifestyle. I wasn't monitored for any progressive liver disease, and I continued to have an occasional glass of wine. Then in 1998, my mom was diagnosed with inoperable liver cancer, or hepatocellular carcinoma, HCC. My whole family was shocked. We had not been informed that hepatitis B led to a higher risk of liver cancer. In fact, my mom had only received one abdominal ultrasound in her lifetime, and that was when she found out she had cancer. She also did not have her liver enzymes or her alpha theta protein, which is a tumor marker, checked. When she did have a blood test after her diagnosis, her numbers were through the roof. Her liver was not in good shape. She was prescribed lamivudine, which was the only antiviral medication available at that time. It was too late, though, to reverse the liver damage. Despite the dire prognosis, my mom decided to receive chemotherapy as a desperate attempt to prolong her life. Sadly, this treatment only made her last few months on earth miserable, and she died soon after. Even though I was devastated by my mom's death, it was a wake-up call for me to take hepatitis B more seriously. I began to educate myself about the disease. I no longer drank alcohol. I already exercised regularly and tried to eat a healthy diet, so I didn't make too many changes in that area. I'm definitely more plant-based now. Most importantly, I started to receive regular blood tests to monitor my liver function and enzyme levels. As well, I had abdominal ultrasounds twice a year, and more recently, fiber scans of my liver. From these tests, I was told I was in phase 1 of the disease, meaning I had a high viral load, fairly normal liver enzymes, and no liver scarring. At this stage of the disease, it was not recommended that I start taking medications, even though I asked Dr. Erb, who was my specialist at the time, when I could begin taking antivirals, because I wanted to do something to prevent damage to my liver. Also, even though I was in phase 1 of the disease, I was still fatigued by having the virus, which is a common symptom of people with chronic hepatitis B. I ended up only working part-time throughout my career, and I retired early, so this virus does affect people regardless of what phase they are in. Then a couple years ago, my liver enzymes start to rise. So Dr. Shida, who is my new specialist, recommended that I begin taking antivirals, and he prescribed entecavir. I have to admit, I was somewhat relieved I would start taking medications, as I hoped that would reduce the chances of me developing fibrosis or cancer. Unfortunately, soon after starting to take entecavir, I developed a severe skin rash, which I thought was an allergic reaction to the medication. I was switched to Vemlidy, but the rash persisted, and I was diagnosed with chronic idiopathic urticaria, which is a medical way of saying I have a skin rash that they don't know the cause of. It could have been because I started on antivirals, but no one knows. Now I take prescription antihistamines to control it. So I've gone from taking no medications to taking 2, which isn't fun, and it's also very expensive since my insurance plan and pharmacare does not cover either medications. As well, unfortunately, my viral load has not reached undetectable levels while on Vemlidy, and it's actually rising after a few years of being on it. Even though Dr. Yoshida says it's very unusual for this to happen, it just emphasizes how unpredictable having this disease can be. People living with hepatitis B have to deal with the uncertainty that one day they might develop liver fibrosis or cancer, even while on medication. And then there's the stigma of this infectious disease. I'm thankful I have not been stigmatized for having it, but I know other people who have. That's why I speak at these forums. I want to raise awareness of the lived experience of having hepatitis B, and hope that one day a cure can be found, like what they have for hepatitis C. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. Thank you, Wendy, for sharing your journey with us. Okay, so now it's time for our Q&A. I would like to invite our speakers to join us on camera again to answer some of the questions from the audience. So I see one here that says, I'm currently pregnant and I have chronic hepatitis B. Can I have children? So perhaps Dr. Yoshida, you might want to address to that question.
Yes, thank you. Well, don't worry. That's my first advice. Let your gynecologist, obstetrician, OBGYN know. Your viral load should be checked. Now, there is post-exposure prophylaxis, as I did briefly mention, that consists of hepatitis B immunoglobulin, like the antibodies that bind up the hepatitis B in high concentration that is given to the baby immediately after birth, and then the first dose of the vaccine with follow-up doses down the road. And that is pretty good at preventing hepatitis B infection, but people who have high viral loads, like greater than 200,000 international units per ml, and some have millions, even hundreds of millions, sometimes the post-exposure prophylaxis can actually not work. And in those circumstances, most of the hepatitis specialists will recommend that at third trimester, I go with week 26, as medication like tenofovir be instituted, which has shown to be pretty safe for the newborn. And the aim is to get the viral load less than 200,000 international units per ml at the time of delivery. And almost everybody who that's prescribed for, it works. And so I think it's highly unlikely if your doctors are on top of things that your baby will end up getting chronic hepatitis B.
Okay. So there's a question too asking, does everyone with chronic Hep B need to take medication?
No. Actually, that's an excellent question because most of my patients actually with hepatitis B actually aren't on medications because they don't need to be. I would say that you only need to go on antiviral drugs for hepatitis B once you have evidence of target organ damage. So if your liver biochemistry becomes elevated, as Wendy mentioned, or you have either a liver biopsy or a fiber scan that shows that there is fibrosis that's more than, say, stage 1, what we call F1, fibrosis 1. So I would say fibrosis 2, fibrosis 3, and fibrosis 4, which is cirrhosis. If you have F2, F3, and definitely F4, you should be on an antiviral for hepatitis B. If you've had previous cancer from liver cancer, you should also be on an antiviral for hepatitis B. But most patients aren't in those circumstances, so they can just be followed. Now, the thing about the antivirals is that generally, once you start it, you really can't stop it because the virus comes back. I know that there's some debate in the United States about that, but in our experience here in BC and in Canada, generally patients who start on antiviral agents kind of stay on it for the long term, and that usually means forever.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Okay. There's another question that's asked, how is hepatitis Delta transmitted?
2 ways. One is that you get co-infection at the same time. If it's horizontal transmission, like an young adult who doesn't have hepatitis B engages in sexual intercourse with somebody who has hepatitis B and hepatitis C, will get dual infection. Or uses drugs and that's contaminated, the needle is contaminated with hepatitis B and D, will get dual infection. The other way is a hepatitis B carrier has sexually transmitted delta or hepatitis B or transmission by injection drugs. So those are the two ways that you can get hepatitis B. If you don't have hepatitis B, it's like the hepatitis B is not going to be able to do anything.
Okay. What are your thoughts on a liver transplant patient who is taking immune suppressant drugs with HBV can fight off the virus so it doesn't become chronic?
So a liver transplant recipient who is on
A transplant patient who is taking immunosuppressant drugs with
Yes, right.
HBV, which HBV can fight off the virus so it doesn't become chronic?
no.
No?
Generally, if you're on anti-rejection drugs which suppress your immune system, and you get hepatitis B, you need to be on a special protocol. You need to be on one of the antiviral drugs that I mentioned, and if you have hepatitis B and you get a liver transplant, then you get an antiviral and you get high dose hepatitis B immunoglobulin for a long period of time, depending on which center you're at. And if you have a liver transplant and you didn't have hepatitis B, but you get acute hepatitis B, then you need to be on antiviral.
Okay. The following two questions are addressed to the two patient advocates. So the first one's for Wendy. What was the biggest obstacle or barrier during your journey with Hep B?
I think certainly, I think it was ignorance, actually, not knowing what this virus was and just what could happen. I mean, just seeing what my mom went through and not realizing just how much damage it could cause and not getting tested. So I think that was probably, once I researched it and understood it better, that helped me to feel, not that you can control the situation, but at least have a better understanding and also what I could do to just protect myself. I got the Hep A vaccine like Dr. Yoshida recommended, and just try to be more careful with my body, not to be exposed to so many toxic things, not realizing more of what the liver did and how it filters out everything that our body breathes in, consumes. And so just being careful about that and not taking Tylenol, not taking too much pain medications, and just being careful about what I can put into my body so that it didn't tax my liver. And also fatty liver disease. I mean, I don't think we talk too much about that, but that's obviously something that you don't want on top of your hepatitis. So it's just being careful about maintaining a healthy weight and exercising and all that stuff. So yeah, those are just knowing that helped me to implement it better.
Yes, that's a good approach. Thank you, Wendy. So for Colette, was a liver transplant ever discussed early in your journey with hepatitis C? And how did this affect your outlook on life?
Yes, the liver transplant list was recommended that I sign up for. Right about 2 weeks after I found out about having the hepatitis. And I decided right away that this was not going to be, it was something that I could get over. And so I went into learning about my immune system and how to boost my immune system and taking antioxidants. And like Wendy is saying, going for a very healthy lifestyle. Yeah.
Thank you. Yes, having a healthy lifestyle have a lot to do with having a healthy liver, right? Okay, one more question. And is there a strong correlation between HBV viral load and liver enzymes? So that will be a question for Dr. Yoshida.
Well, the answer to that is no, there actually isn't. And Wendy talked about phase 1, which we call the immunotolerant phase of hepatitis B carriers. That's when usually it's young people, and it can last several decades, to be honest with you. But the hepatitis B virus and the immune system kind of live in happy coexistence. They ignore each other. And so young people tend to have extremely high viral loads. We're talking like 10, 20, even 100 million. And their liver tests are completely normal. Their ALT, normal ALT being for a man to be less than 50, for a woman to be less than 30. You can have viral loads of 10, 20, completely normal ALT. So there really isn't a correlation between the viral load and the liver biochemistry. Now, ironically, when the immune system tries to wakes up and then says, okay, I'm going to try and kill this hepatitis B, and it starts bombing the hepatitis B and damaging the liver at the same process. Just imagine what happens in warfare. The target is living in a building and the Air Force bombs the building and just happens to cause collateral damage in every building on the block. That's essentially what happens. So the viral load then will ironically come down a bit, but the ALT will start going up. And so there really isn't a very good correlation. I just tend to think that we want those viral loads as low as possible.
Okay. Thank you, Dr. Yoshida. So with that last answer, that concludes our educational session for this evening. I'd like to take this time to thank our speakers, Dr. Eric Yoshida, Colette and Wendy, for the great talks. As mentioned, this session will be available on the CLF Living with Liver Disease webpage and YouTube channel over the next few days. So join us our next session in September on the topic of children's liver diseases. So for more information or to register, please visit our liver.ca/LWLD page at the start of each month. You don't see any information that you're looking for, please do check us in again in a few weeks as we are likely finalizing our speakers. Now we are going into our breakout rooms. At the bottom of your screen, you will see a button that says breakout rooms. Please click the button and give it a few seconds before you see the different groups available. The groups will be split into regions or provinces. So some of you will be grouped together depending on how many attendants we have. So once you see the groups on your screen, please choose your group, click the join button on the right. And if any point you need to leave the room, simply close the room and or the meeting. Okay, so for those French-speaking community members across the country who wish to participate in breakout room discussions in French, feel free to select Quebec or French room.
That's too bad that we didn't get the answer to that question that Monica just asked Dr. Yoshida. Can we hear it now, or is it not
Absolutely,
possible?
let's hear it.
Okay.
Why not?
Monica was asking Dr. Yoshida whether or not there was in his lifetime, whether he thinks that there will be a cure for hepatitis B.
Yeah, I'm just trying to get full screen again. Okay, I think that there will be. You know, it's gonna take a lot of, because you have to manipulate the immune system too. That's the problem. And when somebody's had chronic hepatitis B for years, most people have had it for decades. Their T cells, which is the lymphocytes, they get basically exhausted. They get totally exhausted, and they actually may be dormant for the T cells that affect hepatitis B, and they have to find a way of resurrecting them such that, but at the same time safely, so that you don't want a hyperimmune system, because then you start getting, you might start getting autoimmune disease and liver failure because the immune system's attacking the liver. So it'll happen. It'll happen eventually. In fact, I'm optimistic it'll happen within the next 5 years. But it just depends on the resources of the pharmaceutical companies, whether they see this as a market that they can make money off of it. And that's the bottom line with the pharmaceutical companies. They have to see that there's a potential payoff for them at the end. That's why diseases that have very few patients, there are no drugs being developed because there's no market for the drug company. So I'm hopeful, except the last few drugs which I thought were going to pan out that Gilead had developed, we're putting into clinical trials, they didn't really pan out at all. But I'm still hopeful. I mean, we're living in an era of medical miracles, and I'm pretty sure the next 5 to 10 years it'll happen.
Wow.
Yeah, that's actually a good point. I was just talking about it earlier in the breakout room, how we were talking about hepatitis C, and it was the same aspect where raising awareness about the condition initially, even though the numbers were pretty high in terms of Canadians who were affected by it, probably 15, 20 years ago, it was probably considered a death sentence disease or diagnosis, where if you got diagnosed with hepatitis C, you probably weren't given much time, or it was a pretty dire outcome. And then you fast forward about 15, 20 years, and hear from researchers of Dr. Michael Houghton, when he presented a few years back with the Canadian Liver Foundation, you hear how much research goes into it, how much it takes for it to actually be available, but also more importantly, accessible to the public, so all Canadians. I mean, if you have a drug that's available but nobody can afford it, is it really kind of effective in that matter, especially if it's certain pockets of population of individuals who are considered very vulnerable or considered kind of at a socioeconomically disadvantaged. And those are the ones who need access to this medication. So I guess it's probably more about advocating and educating, and of course, getting policymakers and of course industry to be able to, I guess, fetch for this and kind of move with it.
Yeah,
I agree.
absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much, everyone, for participating in today's Living with Liver Disease session and the breakout room sessions. It was extremely insightful. So before we conclude, I'd like to mention that we will be sending a post-session survey link to all registrants tomorrow to obtain feedback on this session and our program. So thank you all for attending. And should you have any additional question or comments, or simply want to stay up to date on everything liver health related, please connect with us via our social media channels highlighted on the screen, or send us an email at clf@liver.ca. We also want to take this opportunity to thank our sponsors, and of course, a big thank you to all those who attended tonight's session. Have a great evening.